Greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is doing well today. Today, I have a compiled upload of terrifying experiences, some of my favorites, and ones that I hope none of us would ever have to go through. I wouldn't wish any of these experiences on my worst enemy. Also, I'm going to quickly, after that, take a look at some very interesting information via the U.S. government and cryptid alien agenda stuff. But the experiences are going to come first, and they are going to come hard. Before we get into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads that I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment and share the video. Why? Well, because all of these things really do help this channel to continue to grow and go. They are appreciated and they do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into today's upload, shall we? This experience we're going to start this day off with is one that I had mentioned in last week's live stream, maybe 2 weeks ago. And I said that there was one experience that I have shared that really does haunt me. It's one that, well, I have a fear, a healthy fear of water that I can't see the bottom of. I don't like the ocean, I don't like rivers, and I don't like lakes to swim in. I will kayak on all of them, but to swim and to dangle my legs in, no. I know I'm not much safer on a kayak, but I feel that way. This experience, for me, is one that is haunting because where it occurred, who it occurred to, and as a parent, you will exactly know what I'm talking about once you've heard it. My name is Zach, and while I have shared this experience on other channels, I'd like you to read it as well, because I do believe it will help me cope with what I experienced. This happened around July of 2011. I was 21 years old. And my aunt and uncle from my dad's side of the family in the Midwest came out to visit my family that lives in the Pacific Northwest. One of the highlights of their trip was that my uncle, who is my dad's sister's husband, and not related to me by blood, though he is still a cool guy, wanted to experience some deep sea halibut fishing on the Oregon coast, which my dad had arranged via a charter. And lucky enough for me, I had the privilege to be able to go on this fishing trip with my dad and my uncle. A little information about me before we continue is, despite my use of a wheelchair, I've always loved activities such as fishing, hiking, traveling, and camping, for staying still is just not an option for me. However, the day before we were set to go on our charter, it was canceled due to bad weather. While we were disappointed at this setback, to put it lightly, my dad, uncle, and I were determined to do a little bit of fishing. and decided on a place called Devil's Lake located near where we were staying on the Oregon coast. Anyway, the day after the charter was canceled, my dad and I loaded up into my uncle's truck and we left early in dawn to do our fishing. When we got to the lake, it was something straight out of a fisherman's dream, calm and pristine, with not another soul in sight. There was a rather precocious fishing dock, one that seemed to float on the water and had no rail guards or anything of that nature, and decided to set up shop there. Once my pole was baited and my line cast into the water, my dad and uncle went back to the truck for their chairs and the cooler, so we could have something to relax with, enjoy whatever snacks and drinks we had brought along as well. All the fishing gear was already out on the dock, so they didn't need to worry about that. I didn't think anything about being left alone on the dock as my uncle and dad went back to the car, because all I had to do was look behind me, and there they were. Frankly, my attention was drawn to the sky of all things. Birds of prey have been a fascination of mine, and I looked above me to see if there were any in the skies. I always admired how the hawk and osprey seemed to be expert fishermen on the many fishing excursions I have been on, while I was lucky enough to even get a bite. Bald eagles had been said to be in Oregon, though they are a rare sight, and yet places like lakes around Oregon coast where you would expect to find one, so I thought just maybe I'd see one today. Focused was I on my thoughts that whatever happened next to me did not register until I was on the ground. Something had jerked me forward so hard that my wheelchair not only did a 180-degree turn, but spilled me out onto the dock as well. A strong big fish was not possible, because if that had been the case, I would have been pulled straight from the front of my wheelchair into the water. Instead, it felt as if something had grabbed hold of my right wheel and wrenched it so hard that instead of falling straight into the water, I did a 180 and spilled out onto my stomach. This thought that flashed through my mind was further cemented when my wheelchair was pulled away from me, and I heard it splash into the water. Thankfully, and I can't mean this sincerely enough, I've always had a habit to cut the seat belts off of my wheelchairs whenever I got them. Otherwise, this encounter of mine would have probably ended up very different. Yet no sooner than when I heard my wheelchair hit into the lake, I felt a pressure close around one of my legs before I was pulled backward as I made a desperate attempt to crawl away, giving any involuntary shout as I was yanked backward. There was nothing to grasp onto the dock to anchor myself, and in sheer panic I rolled myself onto my back, not thinking of what I'd encounter, and that's when I finally saw it. That face was the only thing I could look at. It was so human in its ovular appearance. Sharp tooth-like scales running vertically down the entire area of its flesh, like some sort of natural armor that was molded this greenish blue color that matched the water. Atop of its head were these gently writhing, long fleshy strands of muscle that to me looked like seaweed that cascaded behind its back. There was a nose with normal nostrils like a human, but with small gill-like slits fluttering on the side of where its nose was. Then there was those eyes, these amber-colored eyes, with the soft rectangular black pupil that if I were to compare now with another animal, I'd say maybe an octopus. They were so full of rage and anger, yet also an unmistakable intelligence. Part of the way I've tried to cope with this encounter of mine is to humanize the attacker, despite it being far from. It seemed as soon as my eyes locked with this creature's that it triggered an enraged response as it leapt its body on top of mine. I couldn't guess why it didn't just try to pull me into the water and finish me off. Maybe it thought it would be easier to kill me on land before dragging me into the lake's depths. I remember as the being was on top of me, I felt a sharp, stinging sensation envelop my back which, although excruciating painful, was nothing compared to the terror that was trying to rip my face off as this creature bared its human-like teeth despite the obvious serrations at the end of them. Instinctively, I brought my arms and hands into a defensive position before managing to get my forearm underneath the creature's throat while my other hand pressed against its forehead, which caused the being to be utter frustration, somewhat strangled this hiss at me. I know I was screaming frantically at the top of my lungs. I know I was crying. There was no time to think, just act in that situation, and that's what I did until my uncle came and struck the creature in the face and head with his boot repeatedly. Almost simultaneously, my dad struck the being in the back of the head with a fishing club, the weapon breaking on the fifth strike over its skull. It was here the being's grip loosened, and I was pulled away while at the same time hearing something heavy sliding back into the water at what I assumed was the creature retreating. From there, I was carried back into my uncle's truck with my dad and uncle barking orders at each other. I remember being sat up in the back of my uncle's truck because apparently I had several lacerations all over my back, and my dad sat beside me the entire ride while my uncle drove us to the nearest hospital while simultaneously calling an ambulance for me. The attack couldn't have lasted longer than a minute of time from the time it grabbed me from my chair to when my dad and uncle started fighting this thing off of me. At the hospital, my uncle and dad blamed the nature of my wounds upon a mountain lion, which I went along with because none of us had the energy to try and explain what we saw. There were lacerations on my arms, back, and even on my leg where the creature had grabbed me that satisfied the doctors enough with our response. Eventually, when I brought the subject up with my uncle and dad, they told me the same thing. They heard me screaming and saw this large being pressed atop of me. When they rushed in, they got a very good look at it, and both of them described the same thing. It was about the size of an average man, maybe 6 feet, and those same sharp, toothy-looking scales adorned its entire body, along with the same molded blue-grayish-green skin. Its strong arms were wrapped behind my back as it tried to take a bite out of my face and head. From its back of its neck to the base of its spine, there was apparently a single uniformed row of sturdy, sharp-looking spines, almost like a crocodile, but more defined. They said my attacker had strong-looking legs as well that ended in large taloned feet that were planted on either side of me as the creature was trying to finish me off. Yet the freakiest element to the being, according to my uncle and dad, was the being's giant tail that was almost the length of its entire body. They said it looked like the stereotypical mermaid tail, except with a sharp-looking scales and a single uniform row of spines on either side and top of the tail. Furthermore, when my dad recalled hitting the beast, he noted that no matter how hard he hit it, there was no blood or bruising, as if the animal's hide was natural armor, which I would not argue. A decade has passed since this incident, and I don't think I am worse for wear because I've had plenty of time to cope with what happened, mostly by researching what happened to me and trying to make sense of it. Interestingly enough, I found that there were reports of a lake monster in Devil's Lake, but the description of said beast is that of an octopus, not a mermaid-type creature. In fact, the only reference to mermaids in the Pacific Northwest that I found was an Inuit legend known as the qualipilic, which is a dangerous sea creature that resembles a woman that preys only on humans. I've always tried to look at things with a scientific mind, and I've done the same thing with this. Perhaps it is a different branch of evolution from us humans, forced to be as brutal as the oceanic environment it lives in order to survive. Thank you for allowing me to share and sharing my experience with your audience. Now, as you can see, why I said if you are a parent, you would know that that experience is terrifying. Thinking back on it, we're talking 13 years. And the way he describes everything, he must have been in his teenage years, judging on, how he describes everything, as looking up for birds and being excited to be with his dad and uncle, this and that. And even if he was in his 20s, his young 20s, this is an absolutely terrifying experience, being trapped in a wheelchair anyway. And then to think a little bit about the encounter and what he encountered. His description of the creature, the eye, and this reptilian kind of tail. It had legs, so it was not the typical mermaid. Yet, the only kind of creature mentioned in the Devil's Lake is one that looks like an octopus. He described an eye, right? And then the Inuit legend. So, what's to say that this creature was not some sort of aquatic shapeshifter, something that, Native Americans in the Pacific Northwest knew of. Maybe they didn't see it shapeshift and they seen different, throughout the years, they saw the creature but didn't realize it was shape-shifting, so had different legends for each kind of body it chose to be in. Maybe it only went for two, an octopus-like creature and this Inuit legend of a creature that drags unsuspecting victims to their death in the depths of the water. Just a theory, just a thought, but it makes a lot more sense on just how he described its eye, and I've thought about that since my first time narrating this, and also at how young he must have been during this encounter, because 2011, that's 13 years ago. So, if he was, let's say he's 30 now, 17 then. Insane, just insane. I could never imagine taking one of my kids fishing and having something like that happen to them. And they're not in wheelchairs. Just imagine the terror and fear this kid's dad must have felt, And then to beat it with a club repeatedly as your brother-in-law is kicking it in the head and face and it's still latched on. Insane. Absolutely terrifying. The second experience brings us from the Oregon coast all the way to the beautiful state of West Virginia. Jeff, my name's Chris. I am a Christian and a fairly recent subscriber from the bold and beautiful, wild, wonderful state of West Virginia, 25 minutes south of Cumberland, Maryland, and 25 minutes northwest of Keyser, West Virginia, hills and hollers. To give more context, I live on a farm of 300 acres that contains 80 plus Black Angus cattle and 3 poultry house of 95,000 chicken. Oh yeah, that many. A large-scale operation for my stepdad and I, for sure. I've never noticed anything strange on this property, but his family has had this farm and acreage for many generations, so God knows what they encountered. They probably would never say anything if they did. We take any dead chicken or any other animal almost a mile away up into the woods on the edge of a large field, a piece I call the dead zone. All the bones and the stench of death is quite ominous, along with the recent paths I have noticed that go to and from this area. It seems there is one large path, along with 2 smaller paths that reach the dead zone, along with some bedding that seems abnormally large for any coyote. I'm wondering if my presence a few days prior would have anything to do with this encounter. I also want to mention that in the 30 years of living here, I've only seen one black bear about 20 minutes south. But in this part of West Virginia, there is a small population of black bear. I've seen a few UFO or UAP experience sleep paralysis and believe in the supernatural world and constant war of good and evil. But the early morning hours of June 27th started this experience, in which I became way more familiar and initiated, so to speak, into the world of the Dogman. A world I don't recommend anyone becoming part of unless you don't have a say, of course. Then it becomes part of your life. Around 1 a.m., I went out to my car to get something. I don't even remember what it is now. And I first noticed there was no wind, not a single cricket or creature that making a sound. Usually this time of year in the summer there is all sorts of insect and large bullfrog/toads that are all around the little pond and waterfall we have out back. I found that odd, but I kept walking out to the enclosed back porch toward my car. Seconds after, I hear what sounds like a large person. I want to mention that at this exact moment of me typing this out at a library from a random small teen said wolf, like out loud from reading a book, coincidentally. And strange at least. Back to the thing I thought was a person walking forcefully yet purposely on 2 feet. I know what deer sound like, especially since that is most common animal around here. It definitely was not a deer. I stopped in my tracks and said, "Hello, who's there?" It stopped then, sped up somewhat, but didn't make any other sounds. I couldn't see exactly where it was, but knew it was in the gravel driveway, which was fairly large. Nothing like the sound of something large late at night on 2 feet stalking around your home with a gravel giving way beneath its weight. I was instantly scared with that unprovoked terror people talk about and knew that something was off or wrong, especially since I didn't run away or respond back. It didn't run away or respond back, People don't just walk around in the middle of nowhere with no respect or fear of what the owner may do. We have guns. Also, I got no smell other than the smell of fear. I then went inside to grab my AR-15 and a phone and light, but found I didn't have enough sense to lock the door. And I didn't have enough hands. I see why people freeze up or don't think to grab their camera to try and get a shot, but I was thinking I may have to shoot again, all right? I went to the balcony, but I was thinking I may have to shoot, all right? I went to the balcony with my gun and light that overlooks the driveway and can see some of the front yard and a good portion of the back. I say, "Who's there? You better speak up. I've got a rifle and I will use it." This thing has now moved up along the wooden fence line we have that separates us from the woods. As I can hear it stomping through the dry grass, it was a very dry summer. I shined the light around and only got a glimpse of something hairy, with a large head on two legs. Hunched over somewhat like a T-Rex, creepily tiptoeing between the large brush and the fence toward the waterfall that is across from the back porch. I believe that the deafening aspect of absolutely no sounds around was probably a predatory response or defense mechanism that us humans should not take lightly. The way this creature was positioned when moving and my weak-ass light made me see more of its shadow than anything, but I did see this gray, maybe with somewhat of a brown-like coyote, but with no moon out and being behind the brush, I couldn't see much after that. I would say 6.5 feet if I had to guess, but it all happened so quickly. All I knew was fight, flight, freeze, or whatever. I was in fright mode. I did at least leave the porch lights on while making sure the inside lights were off. I went to the guest/TV room that has one window looking out upon the front porch, though I did pull the blinds down. I grabbed my phone with 911 punched in and ready to go, mind you, along with the AR and bunkered down in the room. This could be a battle for my life. I tried to position myself where I could move quick, if need be, while keeping an eye on the hallway to my right and front porch window to my left. Within 15 minutes, I noticed something moving around up and down the steps on the front porch, along with noises in the backyard still. Now, it really hits me. There are more than one of these things. For the first 30 minutes to an hour, I was too scared to even get my phone out and try to get a video of the noises at least. While having Charlton Heston grip on the gun the rest of the night, off and on, I could hear 1 to 2 of these things stalking the house with intelligent intent, but sometimes bumping into things. Other than those things, you could hear a sloth blink. It was so quiet. Eventually, noticed the banging that sounded hundreds of feet away, but I couldn't be a good judge of sound outside of any length or distance. It couldn't have been at the wood furnace. It could have been at the wood furnace building or shed 75 feet away. It was like something banging sporadically, then stopping for a bit, then starting again with different variations. I think there had to have been a third creature trying to lure me outside, as the other two were outside around each porch of each side of the room, for that matter. At least one of them, I believe, was stalking around the door/window, while the other looked for any signs of any other animals, people, or neighbors, or maybe just waiting for me to walk outside. These sounds went on for at least 1:30 a.m. to 5:30 a.m. when it started to get light and the other creatures seemed to leave. This period is when I tried to capture some of the action or sounds to my phone. And I do have some evidence of these sounds, but it's nothing like being there in the moment with your heart racing and heightened senses. I don't know if you have ever stayed in one spot for 4 hours, but it begins to take its toll. I practically stayed frozen while being totally aware. I am somewhat ashamed and flabbergasted of this, but I urinated in a 2-liter bottle that was in the trash. I've never had, and pray to God never will have, another experience like this, where the fear engulfs your whole body and the environment around. From around 3:15 to 3:30, I did get one smell that I noticed. For you hunters, the smell was like that when a deer gets gutted and you do a whoopsie and nick the stomach colon area with burning sensation of the nostrils and eyes, or think blood or feces. It slowly crept up to me, and I instantly knew that one of these creatures was close. I could hear heavy breathing or panting along with noises against the wall and window. The ones against the wall sounded like scratches, like when a cat swipes its paws against the toy or something. The sound against the window many times sounded like teeth touching it when it was trying to look in. I felt like I didn't belong here, a mixture between The Boy in the Bubble and The Nightmare on Elm Street and Dog Soldiers, where they were stuck in the house. I felt like I was in between two worlds or dimensions that paralleled each other, but with no way out until morning. At around 5:30 a.m., I heard what sounded like whimpering from the one closest to the window, and noticed the neighbor we have leaving for work, and the light just started to come. Then a quick yelp that caused the others to regroup, if I had to guess. I think they knew that they were going to have to leave, and that the possible meal was going to have to stay locked down and loaded. It was truly unbelievable night that I will never forget. I believe these things are part demonic, part physical, cryptid, part psychological or emotional even, feeding on fear and awe, like they want to make themselves known to specific people at certain times, but sometimes seemingly random, like crossing the road, for example. And when you have varying degrees or power, it's tough to wrap my head around it. But I know the Lord was with me every step of the way. I guess I just had to go through it, experience it to be more refined by coming out of the fire of fear with the hellish experience. Now I just stay keenly aware of my surroundings while praying beforehand. And I go out even near beforehand. If I even go out near the woods or anything alone at night, I may not hunt this year, but I will make sure to next. I find that anything worth understanding should be looked through a biblical lens to try and make sense of things more clearly. I wish we could rid the world of these things, and wish the government powers to be at least tell the truth and inform us about these beasts in our national state parks or even in our backyard while protecting and serving the people. Even though this terrifying experience will forever be solidified into my being, and family and friends don't believe me or even try to understand, I will never forget this night that changed me, and I think made me into a better person overall. God says we should hold domination over all animals or beasts on this earth, but that does not mean to go and hunt them either. I believe that there is more of a spiritual issue than we could ever imagine, but sorry, I've done enough ranting. Thank you for allowing me to share. I do have photos from the next day of the aftermath of evidence which, as things knocked down, holes, scratches in the porch screen, doggy door almost ripped off, major bedding out back by the pond in a large track, along with some videos of these things making noises. But let me tell you, I'd be glad to share if I can get the technological side of my brain to get it done. Thank you, Jeff, for allowing me to share my encounter. You can, of course, share and edit this as you see fit. Oh yeah, I had one more encounter a couple days ago that may be of interest, but I'm just trying to be 100% real, tell the truth, and thankful for you and your great platform. I have this gentleman's email and a phone number. I'm going to get a hold of him because I want him to come on and share it. The reason why I was like, my eyes were, normally when I print these out, they're not that small, but like that is, when I print stuff out, it's usually much bigger, you know, compared to that. So I do apologize for the narration on that. Let's jump into today's third encounter. All right, so like I said, I do have his email and phone number. I am getting in touch with him because this is just an absolutely horrific experience. And I love that experience just because, you know, when I first narrated it, I put myself in those shoes, you know, like, what would it be like to be trapped in your home with three of these creatures outside of your home on 300 acres of land, and, you know, the nearest neighbor being miles from you. Chances are there was more than three, though. So this next experience I will never forget, because the first time I narrated it, I had talked to JR, or Robert Jr., and Robert from New Mexico. And I didn't get a chance to write out all of the experiences the way they told them to me. And I had this on my desk already, and I was like, whoa, I've got to share this with you guys. So let's get into it. Jeff, I have a few experiences I thought you'd be interested in. I also have a few pictures and some personal thoughts. You can use any of this. Just call me Brother Augustine. I am a Benedictine Catholic monk. I had my first encounter when I was 10. It was during the summer, right at dusk, and I decided to walk down to the creek that is behind my parents' home. As soon as I got to the creek, I started getting a bad feeling like something was wrong. I saw that there was a group of deer on the far bank, so I ignored the feeling and crouched down to watch them. It started to get dark, so I stood up to leave, and the deer heard me and started to look around. Just then, I heard movement in the brush about a dozen or feet so to my right. I looked and saw a huge dark shape stand up and then leap 20 or so feet across the creek and land right in the middle of the group of deer. They scattered, and I gasped loud enough for this thing to hear me. And the shape suddenly turned and looked right at me. It was tall, lean, covered with medium-length black fur. It had a tail similar to that of a lab, and its head looked wolfish, but from what I remember, it was narrower and longer than a wolf's head. It made this long, low growl that sounded like something like a mastiff's growl, but with an almost grinding sound like chewing gravel. I turned and ran home as fast as I could. It scared me so bad I had nightmares for months, and I did not go back to that creek for at least 2 years. When it looked at me, I got an instant sense of dread and the feeling of evil. I told my parents, but of course they didn't believe me, so I just tried to pretend that it didn't happen. I told a few people years later, and they said it was a Sasquatch. I've only recently heard of Dogman. I have since found your channel, and it has helped fill in some of the gaps. Since then, I've had the feeling that I am being watched while in the woods, seeing things out of the corner of my eye, having rocks thrown at me, experienced 2 possible infrasound attacks, and something slapped the side of my home a few times. I've never seen anything else definitive through the years, though, until last year. I found myself my first Sasquatch track, and I saw something big sitting on a log that I couldn't explain. Then last month, I found a bunch of tracks and other weird stuff, stick structures, stacked rocks, etc. on my parents' property. And they told me they keep hearing something crashing into the side of the house at night. Anyway, I visited my parents for a couple weeks and went hiking every day. During those 2 weeks, I had my second real encounter. I was hiking about an hour and a half in, and I started to notice flashes of movement behind me. Then, a bit later, I had just walked over this huge rock that didn't move at all with my weight. And about 10 seconds later, I heard something large step on that same rock and made it shift. That got me walking a bit faster. Later, I heard something moving behind me, so I pulled out my phone and made a sweep behind me, taking photos. And the whole time, see first picture, which the pictures will be after this. What you can't see from this picture is there is a drop off behind the trees that runs down to the stream. The Dogman was standing in that stream bed, making it roughly 7 to 8 feet in height. I kept walking and then started to hear breathing behind me. I took the first trail heading back that I found and kept my hand on my pistol the rest of the way back. It followed me the whole way to my car and at one point made what sounded like half a laugh, half a snarl. I've started seeing another one on the Abbey property. I am a Benedictine monk, and the Abbey sits in the middle of 1,900 acres of woodland and ridges and lakes. On the 26th of May, I noticed one following me while I was hiking. See picture 2, around one of our lakes, and managed to get a picture of its snout peeking through the brush. Then, on the 29th of May, I had to go to the top of one of our ridges to put out a campfire that someone had left. I get to the bottom of the ridge and was about to start up when I noticed something walking out of the far tree line and then stop by a closer tree. It looked right at me and then turned and moved back the way it came. I pulled out my phone and got a picture before it ran off. Unfortunately, I had to zoom all the way in to get it, so it is blurry. I also added one that was edited to give you more zoom detail and show. In person, I could clearly make out the body shape, ears, and snout. The worst part was I essentially had to follow it up the ridge to get to the fire. I stopped where I had been and found what looked like a print. I couldn't make out for sure, but it seemed weird. There are some deer tracks in the area, but this was twice as deep. Make of it what you will. The gator I was driving to get to the fire got stuck halfway up the ridge, so I had to walk the rest of the way. Abby walked the rest of the way, 3 miles back to the Abbey, all while feeling like this thing was following me. I'm always armed when I'm in the woods, but I get the feeling it wouldn't do me much good. I do have to note that I've only had the feeling of evil or felt danger in the Dogman, not the Sasquatch. From my experiences and looking at a Christian tradition, the Book of Enoch, Old Testament passages, St. Thomas, and other sources, I personally believe there is a spiritual element to these creatures, Nephilim or similar. I think some people may be more inclined to recognize spiritual elements, which leads them to initially encounter one of these things. Once you do see one, I think they can sense it and are drawn to you. I certainly feel like they are watching me. So far, I feel that prayer helps keep them at bay and maybe even irate or frustrate them. I've gotten the feeling they wanted to scare or hurt me before I was driven out of there. I at least attribute that to a prayer and asking St. Michael for his protection. Here are the pictures of my experiences that I was able to capture. Thank you, Jeff. Here are those photos. And those were the photos from the Benedictine monk. This is the last part of the upload where I share a little bit of research with you guys. This is very interesting. It was a article I found from a old UFO magazine from like 1974. Underground bases in genetic experimentation or engineering. What about the claims made by UFOologists regarding these bases that are being used as genetic engineering? According to their assertions, it is in the lowest level, the 7th level of Dulce base, that the extraterrestrial reptilians are engaging in this kind of experimentation. Again, mythology supports this premise. Native American tribes across the country are the most vocal when it comes to this topic. The Hakarla Apache, whose headquarters is in Dulce, the Navajo, and the Hopi, have long-standing traditions of men's creation and emergence from beneath the surface of the earth. The Algonquin, thus did the lowermost world cave become overfilled with living things, full of unfinished creatures, crawling like reptile over one another in the dark blackness. In this matter they don't stand alone. Berosus, a Babylonian priest, tells of hideous creatures that inhabited the underground realm. He described men who had one body but two heads, some with legs and horns of a goat, and even some with the hindquarters of a horse and body of a man. In short, there were creatures in which were combined with limb of another species of animal. These genetic experiments are, according to the reports from UFO advocates, being conducted by a group of reptilian beings in the lowest level of the space. Thomas Castiello, former senior security officer at the base, testified that the base at Dulce is a 7-level underground facility with the lower levels described as a series of natural caves. It is believed by Castiello that these caverns were used for different experimentation and extraterrestrial races in the remote past. In Hindu, the Naga, or serpents, once lived on Earth, but the great god Brahma sent them to live under the sea and in the 7th level of the underground realm called Patala. In the Sumerian descent to the netherworld, Inayana is required to pass through 7 gates to finally reach the bowels of the underworld. Aztec legends, the Quetzalcoatl, feathered serpent, went to Mictlan, the Aztec underworld, and created mankind using its own blood and bones of a previous race. Throughout mythology, the act of creating humanity is also associated with a specific group of gods, the fertility gods. Fertility gods around the world are traditionally depicted as reptilian and amphibious in nature, and appear in art as a blend between a man, fish, man, or snake. So I wanted to share this because I truly believe that what we call crawlers originated from bases like Dulce. Experimentation with the human genome and alien genome, possibly with other things, reptilian, human, whatever, to create the crawler. And this one Algonquin recount: thus did the lowermost world cave become overfilled with living beings, full of unfinished creatures crawling like reptiles over one another in the dark blackness. To me, that sounds like a crawler. I've had quite a few different people send me crawler experiences, and that's why we call them crawlers. And they are crawling like reptiles over one another in the darkness. Usually the crawlers are spotted in the dark more often than, people seeing Bigfoot and Dogman, because they're spotted in the daytime as well as nighttime, but crawlers specifically during the night. And I think it's because the sun bothers their skin and such. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And with that, I'd like to thank you all for supporting this channel. It is, after all, your support that keeps the channel growing and going, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free. Everyone is simply treated with the respect that we all deserve, and that is because of all of you, so thank you. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions. Never stop searching for the truth. God bless you all.